"I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't mean to disappear." "Luna," whispered her voice, cracking through the storm as Ethan swept his flashlight across the freezing cliffs. And then he saw her. A tiny figure curled beneath a broken bench, soaked to the bone, clutching a torn notebook like it was her only lifeline. He dropped everything and ran. But when he pulled her into his arms, she looked up and said something that made his heart stop. "You look just like the picture." "What picture?" "Why him? If your heart skipped like mine just did, tell me what you'd do. And don't forget to like this story is just getting started." The wind howled over the cliffs of Acadia, Maine, carrying with it the scent of salt and pine. The sky was smeared with late winter gray, and the ocean churned like it held secrets too heavy for the shore. In a mansion, tucked into the edge of the wilderness, all steel stone and seclusion, Ethan Caldwell stood motionless before a wall of windows. He watched the storm roll in its cold breath, fogging the glass in ghost-like patterns. He was 44, a titan of biotech innovation, the CEO of Celera Genomics, and the kind of man who had made headlines not for scandals, but for revolutions in medicine. But tonight, he wasn't thinking about the future of healthcare. Tonight, his thoughts circled back to something more primal, more personal. The silence. It had been 10 years since the accident. 10 years since his younger sister Isabel had disappeared into a haze of unanswered questions and late-night calls that went nowhere. She was brilliant, impulsive, unpredictable, and she had left behind nothing but a half-packed suitcase and a voicemail that cut off mid-sentence. Since then, the holiday season had become unbearable for Ethan. Too many memories, too much noise pretending to be joy. He had come to the estate to escape. No board meetings, no champagne galas, no responsibility beyond breathing. But in the quiet of this place, something inside him throbbed louder than ever. Regret, perhaps, or guilt, or a longing that had no name. Ethan stepped back from the glass and turned toward the fireplace. The flames licked lazily at the log shadows dancing across the stone. He hadn't spoken to anyone in 2 days. His assistant Claire had texted updates, but he ignored them. He didn't want updates. He wanted silence to explain itself. And then it came. A sound so faint it could have been imagined. A voice carried on the wind so fragile it barely reached him. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'll be good." Ethan froze. The glass in his hand thudded harmlessly onto the rug. His breath caught as he strained to hear again. Nothing. Only wind and the steady thump of his pulse in his ears. But the voice had been real. He knew it. He grabbed his coat and flashlight, shoved his feet into boots, and stepped into the storm. The cold punched him square in the chest. Snow was falling thick, the kind that buried paths and blurred direction. He moved instinctively, like something was pulling him forward across the icy terrace down the slope that led to the bluff. The flashlight's beam was thin against the darkness, cutting through flakes like smoke. Then he heard it again. Closer now. "Please, I promise." The voice cracked like glass. He followed it, stumbling over half-buried stone and drifted branches until the beam of light hit something a small figure, curled beneath a wooden bench, barely visible beneath a mound of snow. A child. Alone. Shivering. "Hey," he called, his voice raw. He dropped to his knees, brushing snow from the little body. A girl no more than 7. Her jacket was soaked through, one glove missing. Her face, pale lips tinged blue. She didn't open her eyes. Her head lolled as he lifted her light as paper. Ethan didn't think. He ran. Back through the woods, up the slope, his lungs on fire and legs cramping with each step. Snow bit at his skin, wind clawed at his face, but he held her close like something sacred. Inside the house, he kicked the door open, rushed to the hearth, and wrapped her in every blanket he could find. The fire roared now. He filled hot water bottles and tucked them beside her, careful not to burn her fragile skin. Her breathing was shallow but steady. He sat beside her, dripping wet, and for a long time he didn't move. He just watched her. A stranger. A mystery. A whisper in the dark that had shattered everything he thought he'd come here to forget. Her lips moved. He leaned in. "Don't send me back," she murmured, barely audible. Ethan's heart lurched. Who was she? Where had she come from? And what had driven her into a blizzard alone and terrified? He sat back slowly, still shaking. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't just a lost child. He felt it in the marrow of his bones. This was something more. Something had found him. The morning light in Acadia was soft, filtered through layers of fog and pine. But inside Ethan's house it was sharp and invasive. It sliced across the floor in stark angles, falling over the girl still asleep on the leather couch. Ethan sat nearby, his second cup of coffee gone cold in his hands. He hadn't slept. Not really. His mind had been playing a loop of questions that refused to find answers. She hadn't stirred much through the night, though her breathing had deepened, her skin had warmed. A doctor's visit would be necessary soon, he knew that, but something in him resisted the idea of handing her over just yet. Not to authorities, not to strangers, not until he understood what had brought her here. It was irrational and possibly illegal, but it felt right. The girl woke with a soft start, blinking against the unfamiliar room. For a long moment she said nothing. Her eyes scanned her surroundings, the fire, the windows, the towering bookshelves before landing on Ethan. She didn't speak, only watched him with a guarded calm that felt far too practiced for a child. "You're safe," he said gently. "My name is Ethan. Do you remember your name?" She nodded slowly. "Luna. That's a beautiful name." She glanced toward the window where snow still whispered against the glass. Her hands clutched the blanket tighter. "Where's my mom?" Ethan hesitated. "I don't know yet, but I'd like to help you find her." Silence again. She chewed at a cracked fingernail, her small shoulders stiff beneath the layers of warmth. "I'm not supposed to talk to strangers," she said finally. "That's smart," Ethan replied. "But sometimes strangers become helpers." That seemed to satisfy her for the moment. She nodded, once eyes still scanning, still assessing like someone who had learned too early that trust was earned slowly and easily betrayed. Later, while Luna was sipping warm broth in the kitchen, Ethan searched her coat for clues. It felt intrusive, but necessary. In the left pocket, he found two things: a crumpled train ticket from Boston dated 2 days prior, and a small folded notebook. The cover was decorated in stickers and the corner had been chewed. Inside were pages of drawings, rough, childlike sketches done in colored pencil. But they weren't random. Each page told a story. A woman with long dark hair lying in bed surrounded by tubes. A girl, clearly Luna, holding a flower. A train with the word hope scribbled above it in shaky block letters. And then one that stopped him cold, a drawing of a tall man with dark hair and glasses standing in front of a house that looked almost exactly like his own. Ethan swallowed hard. This wasn't coincidence. She hadn't stumbled onto his property by accident. He returned to the kitchen and sat across from Luna. "Can I ask you about these?" he said, gently placing the notebook between them. She froze. Her fingers tightened around the spoon. "They're just drawings. This one," he pointed to the sketch of the man who is he. She stared at it for a long moment. "I don't know his name, but Mama showed me a picture once. She said if I ever got lost, I should find him." Ethan felt the breath leave his body. Did she say why? Luna shook her head. Only that he used to help people. A long time ago. Something inside him cracked. "Your mom, what's her name?" Maya. The name echoed like thunder in a quiet canyon. Ethan pushed back from the table, the floor feeling unsteady beneath him. He knew that name. Not well, not intimately, but it was familiar. From years ago. Medical conference. An old donor application. He couldn't place it. But it hadn't been random. Ethan stood. He walked to his home office and pulled up his encrypted donor logs, searching Maya. After a few dead ends, a name surfaced, Maya Sorensen. Applied for a research grant through Solara's Medical Foundation 8 years ago. Her application had been denied. Denied by him. He remembered now, vaguely. She had applied for assistance after an experimental treatment for autoimmune complications was pulled from funding. The notes showed incomplete documentation, a polite way of saying her file was buried under more prestigious candidates. It hadn't been personal, it had been protocol. But now, it felt like fate. Back in the kitchen, Luna had gone quiet again. She was drawing on a napkin, a tiny girl with big eyes beside a hospital bed. Ethan sat beside her and said, "Do you know where your mom is now?" Luna looked up. Her eyes weren't teary, they were dry defiant. She said she was going to sleep for a little while. She told me to find the man in the house on the cliff. That was all. No more information. No location. No goodbye. Just faith, a mother's desperate final hope. Ethan made some calls. The first was to Claire asking her to search medical records in the Boston area for a Maya Sorensen admitted in the last 3 days. He didn't explain, he just said it was urgent. Then he contacted a private paramedic service he trusted. He needed to be ready. If Maya was alive, they'd go to her. If she wasn't. He didn't want to finish the sentence. Hours passed. Luna fell asleep again on the couch this time, more peacefully. Ethan sat nearby, her notebook open in his lap. One of the later drawings caught his eye. It showed 3 figures holding hands under a bright sun. A woman, a girl, and a man with glasses smiling. It was clumsy and sweet, but there was hope in it. He hadn't been anyone's hero in a long time, maybe never. But for this girl, he might still have the chance to be. At midnight, Claire called back. "We found her," she said. "Maya Sorensen. She's in ICU at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. No insurance. No listed emergency contact. Prognosis, not great." Ethan's voice was low. "Tell them we're coming, and tell them I'm paying for everything." Then he looked at Luna, still sleeping, her hand curled beneath her cheek like she hadn't had a safe place to rest in years. He whispered to no one in particular, "I'm sorry too." And he meant it, more than he ever had before. The train ride to Boston was quiet, except for the soft rhythmic hum that filled the space between Ethan's thoughts. Luna sat beside him, her small frame nearly lost in the oversized Sita coloring book open in her lap. She wasn't drawing today. Just tracing her finger along the outlines of old sketches, the same way someone might run their hand along the spine of a loved one's coat, trying to remember what warmth used to feel like. Ethan hadn't spoken much since the call. Claire had arranged everything, the hospital authorization, the private transport team, the necessary legal documents that allowed him to stand as Luna's temporary guardian. Everything was moving with clinical precision. But inside Ethan nothing felt steady. They arrived just before dawn. The hospital loomed in shades of sterile white and steel, faceless and functional. Ethan had stood in front of buildings like this countless times, mostly as a donor, sometimes as a guest speaker. But never like this, never carrying a child whose mother was clinging to life just a few floors above. The nurse at the front desk offered a tight smile. "She's still in critical condition. Stable, but we're monitoring her closely. You'll want to speak to Dr. Wren on the 3rd floor." Luna tightened her grip on his coat. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, scanned the long corridors like she was searching for someone familiar. Ethan bent down to her level. "Do you want to wait out here, or come with me?" She looked up. "I want to see my mom. I'll ask," he said gently. "But you might have to wait a little." The elevator ride was slow. Ethan watched the numbers blink by, feeling like each floor peeled away another layer of certainty. When they reached the ICU, Dr. Wren met them young, composed the kind of physician who'd seen too many miracles to still be optimistic, but too many goodbyes to ever be cold. "She's unresponsive, but stable," Wren said as they stood outside the room. "She arrived dehydrated, malnourished, some internal trauma, likely from long-term untreated complications. It's amazing she made it this far." Ethan peered through the glass. Maya was barely visible beneath the tubes and wires. Her hair was matted, her skin pale, her body shrunk beneath the hospital linens. And yet, there was something undeniably strong in the stillness, like the quiet resolve of someone who had endured storms most couldn't name. Luna stood beside him silently. When she saw her mother, her breath hitched, but she didn't cry. She simply whispered, "She waited for me." Dr. Wren spoke again, lower this time. She listed no emergency contacts, no insurance. "If you hadn't called," Ethan nodded. "I'm covering everything." He didn't wait for permission. He stepped into the room with Luna, pulled a chair to Maya's bedside, and sat. For a long time, no one said anything. Eventually, Luna reached into her backpack and pulled out a drawing one she hadn't shown before. It was of a tree, cracked and half bare, growing in a field of stones. But from one of the branches, a tiny sprout had begun to bloom. She placed it beside her mother's hand. That night, they stayed in a nearby hotel, but Ethan couldn't sleep. His mind circled the same unanswerable questions. Why Maya had chosen him, why she never called, why this girl, this tiny brave soul, had been sent into the world with nothing but drawings and a name. He called Claire again, this time asking her to dig deeper, old records, any communication between Solara and Maya Sorensen. Claire promised to call back. When the answer came, it felt like thunder. Maya hadn't just applied for a grant. She'd once been a research assistant on a short-term fellowship part of a pilot program funded by Solara during its early expansion. Ethan's signature had approved the cut to that program during a round of budget downsizing. She'd been removed, compensation revoked, housing stipend canceled mid-month. Claire's voice on the line was quiet. She wrote a letter to the foundation, pleading for reinstatement, said she was newly pregnant, that she'd relocated based on the offer, but the request was denied. Ethan sat in the hotel chair, cold creeping through him like mold in an empty room. He remembered none of it. Maybe because there had been too many decisions, too many lives on the line of funding sheets, too many names that had never become faces. But now, one of those names had eyes that looked just like Luna's. The next day, Ethan returned to the hospital alone. Luna stayed behind with Amelia, a therapist he'd hired that morning. Luna had barely spoken to her, but she'd accepted her presence, which for now was enough. He entered Maya's room, sat by her bed again. This time, he brought no words, just silence, just presence. But in that silence, the questions clawed louder. He whispered, "Finally, I'm sorry." Her eyelids didn't flicker. Her monitors beeped with mechanical indifference. "I don't know if you remember me," he said, voice cracking, "but I remember you now. I remember the letter. I read it today." His throat tightened. He looked at the fragile woman before him and saw with painful clarity the cost of his convenience, the price of forgetting that policies weren't just margins, they were lifelines. "I've built a company off the idea of precision, of fixing what's broken. But I missed the one thing I should have seen." His fingers brushed the edge of Luna's drawing, still by the bedside. "I promise I won't disappear on her. I promise I'll carry what you started." He stayed for hours, talking, listening to his own guilt, to her silence. Somewhere deep inside he hoped she could hear him, that his words might bridge whatever distance time had built. Before leaving, he turned back once more. "Come back, Maya. She needs you." And I think, maybe I do too. That night, snow returned to Acadia, thick and soft, blanketing everything in clean white silence. But inside the hospital a storm had already passed, and in its wake a truth too long buried had finally begun to rise. The news came on a Tuesday morning just as the sun cracked open over Boston and turned the gray of winter into something golden. Maya had woken up. The call came from Dr. Wren, his voice taut with relief. "She's conscious, weak but responsive." First thing she asked for was her daughter. Ethan stood at the hotel window with the phone pressed to his ear, the city still bathed in its quiet morning hush. He closed his eyes. There were no words, just the sudden, weightless feeling of a burden he hadn't known he'd been carrying being lifted, if only slightly. At the hospital, Luna clutched his hand tighter than usual. As they turned the corner into Maya's room, the child froze. Ethan knelt beside her, heart thudding. "She's awake," he whispered. "You can go to her." Luna didn't move at first. Then slowly she stepped into the room. Maya looked thinner than ever, but her eyes, those sharp, observant eyes, were unmistakably alive. They welled with tears the moment they landed on Luna. No words, just outstretched arms, trembling and waiting. Luna ran. Their embrace was small and quiet, but Ethan had never seen anything louder in its love. He stood back, giving them space until Maya looked past her daughter and met his gaze. "Ethan Caldwell," she said hoarsely, voice barely more than a breath. He nodded, feeling suddenly transparent under her stare. "I remember you," she continued, "from years ago. You wore nicer suits back then." The corner of his mouth twitched. "I've been rethinking my wardrobe." There was a pause. Then a trace of a smile crossed her lips, wry, tired but there. "I didn't think you'd remember me," he admitted. "I never forgot," she said softly. "It's hard to forget the person who sealed your fate." Silence settled like snow. Ethan stepped closer. "I read your letter, and I didn't fight for you when I should have. I can't change that." "No," Maya said, her fingers lightly stroking Luna's hair. "But you can choose who you fight for now." Ethan didn't respond. He couldn't. The room felt thick with a history neither of them had asked for but now had no choice but to carry. The burden of unfinished things. In the days that followed, Maya's recovery progressed slowly. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. Amelia visited often, working gently with Luna, helping her build words for things she'd buried too deep. Ethan came every day, sometimes staying into the night, talking with Maya, learning the corners of her life that he had once callously overlooked. He found himself at war with the man he used to be, the one who once calculated worth in metrics, who let human stories get buried beneath algorithms and ambition. That man had no place here. But outside the hospital walls, a different storm was brewing. It began with a tabloid leak, an anonymous tip about a reclusive tech CEO sheltering a mysterious child in a cliffside home. The story exploded within hours. Speculation ranged from scandal to secret adoption. Some praised Ethan's compassion. Others framed it as a PR stunt. The truth, as always, was quieter than the headlines. Claire called him that night. "You need to get in front of this, Ethan," she warned. "The board is panicking. Investors are asking questions." "I don't care. Well, they do. This could cost you your seat." He sighed, watching Luna color on the floor of the hospital waiting room. Then maybe it should. He hung up. The next morning he released a statement. No PR firm, no spin, just truth. He told the story of Maya, of a broken system, of mistakes that once cost a woman her future and almost cost a child her mother. He took responsibility. He pledged funding to community clinics, pediatric trauma centers, and reentry grants for mothers seeking work after medical crises. And then he ended the statement with a sentence that hadn't been reviewed by any legal team. I built a company that saves lives. But I forgot to save the people behind the data. I won't make that mistake again. The world reacted predictably. Some praised him. Others accused him of damage control. But this time, Ethan wasn't watching the headlines. He was watching Maya smile as Luna read her a story. He was watching hope grow in the small spaces between moments. Maya, for her part, was resolute. I'm not a charity case, she told him one afternoon. Don't write me a check. Don't give me some comfortable story to fit into, I won't, Ethan said. But maybe there's space to build something new. Together. She eyed him cautiously. You mean us, I mean something real, whatever form that takes. She didn't answer then. She just looked at Luna and then back at him and let the silence speak. Later that week, Maya sat up for the first time. Amelia brought Luna a small watercolor set, and the girl painted quietly beside her mother's bed. She painted a field and a sky and a house that didn't exist yet but maybe could. In the center, she painted 3 stick figures holding hands. I named it Someday, she whispered. Ethan leaned over her shoulder. It's beautiful, he said. And in that moment it was. Not perfect, not complete, but beautiful. The beginning of something new. Spring arrived slowly in Maine, like someone tiptoeing back into a room they weren't sure they were welcome in. The snow retreated from the hills in hesitant patches, giving way to wildflowers that pressed through the thawed earth like small rebellions. Ethan stood on the deck of his cliffside home, the one that had once been a monument to isolation, now carrying the distant sounds of laughter from inside. It had been 3 months since Maya was discharged from the hospital. 3 months of new rhythms, cautious optimism, and days that didn't feel borrowed anymore. She moved into the guest house a few steps down the hill from the main house, her decision, her boundaries. And he respected every inch of them. Ethan didn't try to define what they were. Not yet. What mattered more was showing up daily without condition. He did the school drop-offs with Luna. He cooked badly, but tried. He read old books out loud while Maya rested in the hammock she insisted on putting by the window. He didn't rescue. He didn't fix. He just remained. Maya had returned slowly to herself, too. Not the woman she had been, but someone new. Stronger in some places, softer in others. She spent her afternoons volunteering at a local community clinic. The first few days she said almost nothing to anyone. But as the weeks passed, her presence began to anchor the space. Mothers came to her with questions. Nurses leaned in for her opinion. She didn't demand trust, she earned it. Ethan watched from afar, learning a different kind of leadership from her. Luna blossomed like she'd been waiting for this all along. Her nightmares faded, replaced by stories. Her drawings grew more detailed, filled with trees and boats, and small, steady houses with warm windows. One evening, Ethan came home to find one pinned to his refrigerator. It showed 3 stick figures again this time. One of them had a beard and was holding a coffee mug. Underneath, she had written, "Thank you for finding us." He stared at it for a long time. Word spread quickly when Ethan stepped down as CEO of Solera Genomics. Investors were stunned. Media outlets speculated. But the truth was simple: the company no longer needed him, or at least not the version of him who used to run it. He appointed Claire as interim CEO, something she'd earned 100 times over, and announced the launch of a new venture, the Lighthouse Project. The initiative focused on rebuilding lives disrupted by medical collapse, not just treatment but holistic recovery, housing, counseling, career re-entry. No corporate handshakes, no press conferences, just names, stories, second chances. At the first board meeting of the Lighthouse Project, Maya sat in the back of the room silent until she was asked to speak. When she did, everyone listened. Not because she had a degree or a title, but because she spoke like someone who had lived it all and still believed people were worth saving. "Don't design programs to feel noble," she said calmly. "Design them to work. Make sure the woman who shows up alone, scared, and broke on your doorstep, the one who doesn't look like your daughter or your demographic, has someone on the other side of the door who knows what to do. Or, at least, knows how to listen." The room fell quiet. Then someone clapped. Then everyone. Later that night, on the ride back, Ethan looked over at her in the passenger seat. She was gazing out the window, hands folded peaceful. "You always say the right thing," he said. "No," she replied. "I just say the thing. No one else is brave enough to start with." Back at the house, Luna was asleep in the reading nook, curled beneath a quilt she and Ethan had picked out together at a roadside market. Her shoes were still muddy from a walk they'd taken earlier along the beach. Maya gently brushed hair from her daughter's forehead, kissed her, and then lingered a moment too long before standing. Ethan offered her tea, but she shook her head. They stood outside on the deck night, pressing gently around them. The lighthouse in the distance blinked steadily, a rhythm as familiar now as breathing. "I've been thinking," she said, pulling her cardigan tighter. "This place, it used to look like a prison to me. All the glass, the stone. Like someone built it to keep the world out." He nodded. "That's not far from the truth. But now," she continued, "it feels like somewhere people come to heal." He looked at her not as someone waiting for an answer, but as someone who finally had one. "It wasn't the house," he said quietly. "It was who I let inside." She turned to face him fully. "Ethan, do you ever think about what this is? Us. I mean, we're not—" "I know," he said, not needing her to finish. "I think about it every day, and I've stopped trying to define it. Why? Because for the first time in my life, I'm not building toward a result. I'm living inside a process, and it turns out that's where love hides." Maya didn't respond, but she took his hand. Weeks later, Luna held her first art showcase at a local library. Her teacher had nominated her for a children's creative grant, and she'd won. The exhibit was called Light from the Cliff. Each piece told a part of her journey, not just of trauma, but of recovery. One watercolor stood in the center, a tall house on a cliff, windows glowing warm with 3 figures standing at the edge hand in hand. "I call this one Home," she announced proudly to the small crowd. A woman in the back whispered, "That must be her parents." But Ethan and Maya only smiled. Because it didn't matter who saw it that way. They knew the truth. Home wasn't just a place. It was a choice. A quiet, daily decision to stay, to show up, to believe that healing didn't mean forgetting but remembering better. And in that choice they had found something bigger than rescue, bigger than redemption. They had found each other. In the quiet, after the storm, it's often the smallest voices that echo the loudest. Luna didn't cry out for help. She whispered. And it was that whisper, torn by wind, barely heard, almost missed, that cracked open the life of a man who had spent years building himself into a fortress. Ethan Caldwell didn't plan for redemption. He didn't plan for connection. He certainly didn't plan to become part of a story that would rewrite his own. But that's the thing about the human heart, it doesn't need permission to break. It just needs a reason to open. When Ethan found Luna on that freezing cliff, he had no idea who she was, but in saving her he found more than a lost child. He found a thread back to his own forgotten humanity. Through her drawings, her silence, her courage, he began to feel again. He began to remember that wealth can't replace responsibility. that leadership is hollow when it lacks compassion. That real power lies not in creating things but in creating space for people to heal. And then there was Maya. Her body fragile, her future uncertain, yet her soul was solid iron. The moment Ethan laid eyes on her in that hospital bed, something inside him shifted. Not out of guilt, but clarity. Here was a woman whose name he had once skimmed past in a decision log. A life he had once unconsciously dismissed. And now she was the mother of the girl who had just pulled him back from his emotional brink. Maya didn't ask for pity. She didn't need saving. She needed someone who would listen without conditions, and that more than anything became the catalyst for everything that followed. Over the weeks and months that came after something remarkable happened, not dramatic or cinematic, but real. Day by day, trust was built, in whispered conversations and shared meals, in early morning walks and late-night silences. Maya began to heal. Luna began to smile. And Ethan, he began to stay. For a man who had spent most of his adult life running from pain, from memory, from connection, that was no small miracle. They didn't call themselves a family. There were no labels, no roles to force, but there was laughter. There was consistency. There were 3 toothbrushes in the bathroom, and art supplies scattered across the living room floor. There were unspoken rituals, tea at sunset bedtime stories, surprise pancakes on Sundays. And those in the end spoke louder than any declaration ever could. Ethan stepped away from the spotlight, from boardrooms and earnings calls, not out of shame, but out of purpose. He created the Lighthouse Project not to fix his past, but to build a future that no longer ignored stories like Maya's. He stood in the shadows of his own legacy and said, "I missed something. But I'm here now, and I'm listening." It wasn't just an apology, it was a blueprint for something better. Maya, once dismissed by a system too rigid to see her worth, found her voice again. She used it not to indict the past, but to advocate for those still trapped inside it. Her story became a light for other women navigating medical crises, abandonment, and rebuilding. She stood in front of rooms full of executives and told the truth in plain, calm sentences. And they listened not because she demanded it, but because she embodied it. Luna thrived. The girl who once drew shadows now painted hope. She told her story at school, in workshops, even in front of cameras. But she always ended with the same line, "I was lost, but someone came back for me." And maybe that's what this story is about. Not grand gestures or perfect endings, but someone showing up even when it's late, even when it's hard, even when they weren't the one who caused the pain, but choose to be the one who helps carry it. We often think healing looks like triumph, like victory, but sometimes healing is just a man kneeling on a frozen path in the dark, holding a child he doesn't know, and whispering, "I've got you," and meaning it. So what's the lesson here? Life doesn't wait for you to be ready. It interrupts. It surprises. It breaks you open in moments that feel like accidents but are often quiet invitations to become more human. Ethan didn't get a second chance with his sister, but he got one with Luna, with Maya. And more importantly, he took it. He didn't just say sorry. He changed. He listened. He stood beside them, not ahead, not above, but with. In a world addicted to speed and efficiency, this story reminds us of something slower, quieter, and far more vital, the power of presence. That being there for someone, truly being there, can heal wounds no medicine can reach. That the person you overlook today might hold the key to your own becoming tomorrow. That love is not a noun, it's a verb. A series of choices made daily, often in silence. So, if you've made it to the end of this story, take a breath. Think about who you might need to listen to. Think about what part of your life deserves more presence. Think about what second chance you might be brave enough to take, and then act, however small, because sometimes the biggest transformations begin with the smallest whispers. If this story touched something in you, if it made you pause, cry, smile, or simply feel, then let us know. Drop a comment, share your own story, and most of all, subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more real, heartfelt stories like this one to life. Stories about people who fall and fight and love anyway. Stories that don't just entertain but awaken something inside you. Let's build a world where no one's voice is too small to be heard, and no one's heart is too far gone to be held. See you in the next story.